Hey, it's me, Riker. Today we're going to have a look at the brand new hypogean hero, Olgath the Baneblast. Now, this hero wears leather-based gear, is part of the Ranger class, and his primary role is to provide a massive amount of AoE damage for your teammates. Now, this hero over here is made up of two units, being Olgath, the silver little hero, and his pet called Death Knell. Now, Olgath will feed his little pet three different types of ammunition, being scatter shells, shrapnel shells, and piercing shells. Now, each one has a different effect, and depending on which one is used, will deal a different amount of damage depending if the enemies are grouped together or scattered on the battlefield. So let's have a look at a deep dive into how this hero's abilities work. His ultimate skill, Infernal Bombardment. Olgath leaps into the air with Death Knell and fires an infernal shot at each enemy in turn, until all enemies have taken damage from this skill one time or there are no more targetable enemies. So if an enemy has disappeared off the battlefield, then Olgath will stop using his ultimate skill. Olgath will fire at least 5 and at most 10 inferno shots each time this skill is used. He is invincible while firing this ability. So this is similar to Flora as she is constantly in the air. However, Olgath will simply be for a short duration in the air while using this ability. Inferno shots consume one loaded shell of each type, which will be fused together and fire at the target, dealing AoE damage equal to 250% of Olgath's attack rating and triggering the effects of the consumed shells. So those are the three that I mentioned. If no shells are consumed, only the AoE damage will be dealt. Level 2. Olgath's bombardment continues until all enemies have taken damage from the skill one time, or until there are no more targetable enemies. However, now he'll be able to fire from 5 to 15 infernal shots each time this skill is used. The level 3. Olgath's bombardment now continues to attack all enemies until they have taken damage from the skill 2 times, or there are no targetable enemies, but now he can fire between 10 to 20 shots each time this skill is used. So this is a pretty significant buff for him, especially allowing him to deal more AoE damage to the enemies. His next ability, Salted Shell. Olgath creates a ball of scatter shells, shrapnel shells, and piercing shells in that order. He feeds the ball to Death Knell, loading it with 3 shells of that type, then fires one infernal shot. Death Knell can store up to 3 shells of each type. When firing an infernal shot, he will consume a scatter shell, which will greatly increase the AoE of the shot. Consuming a shrapnel shell fires 2 extra shots, dealing AoE damage equal to 250% of his attack rating, and consuming a piercing shell causes the target to lose additional health equal to 80% of Olgath's attack rating. So this is similar to a bleed-like effect. The level 2, when firing an infernal shot, each type of shell consumed will increase the damage of each shot by 20%. So this is similar to Scarlet, where each time she uses the ultimate skill, she will be able to do more and more damage for each subsequent ultimate ability used. The level 3. When firing an infernal shot, if the shot does not consume any scatter shells, each of the other types of shells will increase the shot's AoE damage. The level 4. Each time a salted shell is used, it increases the damage of all subsequent infernal shots by 2% until the end of battle. So this is another buff to this ability over here, the 20% buff. His next ability, Fatal Fusillade, which is a passive. When Olgath hits with a normal attack, he loads 1 shell into Death Knell, in that order of their creation. If that Death Knell is already loaded with all shell types, when Olgath hits with a normal attack, the normal attack will be upgraded into an infernal shot. So this is the silver hero. This effect can only trigger once every 8 seconds. The level 2, this effect can trigger every 6 seconds, level 3 every 4 seconds, and the 13 engravings each time an infernal shot hits. Death Knell will be loaded with 1 shell of each type that it hasn't already been loaded with. His next ability, Cataclysmic Roar, which is a passive. When Olgath receives melee damage exceeding 10% of his current health, Death Knell will roar 3 times. Each roar will stun nearby enemies for a short time and knock them back. This effect can only trigger once every 15 seconds. Now, this is similar to Leonardo da Vinci when he takes an exceeding amount of damage, similar to this one over here, 10%, and instead of Leonardo da Vinci being teleported to the other side of the battlefield, Death Knell will simply stun the enemies for a couple of seconds. The level 2, each roll damages nearby enemies for 260%. The level 3, for each type of shell loaded into Death Knell, the damage of each roll is increased by 20% of Olgath's attack rating. Cataclysmic Roar does not consume any shells. And the 60 engravings, Cataclysmic Roar dispels any control effects affecting Olgath and causes Olgath to be immune to control effects for 3 seconds. So let's have a look at his signature item, Death Knell. Deadly Discernment. When you unlock this signature item, if Infernal Bombardment hits all targetable enemies enough times to stop the bombardment, it will prioritize targets with the lowest current health. The level 10, after Olgath's infernal shots consumed all shell types, his attack rating will be increased by 5% up to 20% up to the end of battle. And the level 10, similar to the level 20, increases the attack rating buff up to 40%, which is a pretty significant buff for him if he can last for that duration of battle. And the 30 signature item, if an infernal shot is unable to deal any damage, Death Knell will regain all consumed shells. So let's have a look at his furniture. Loaded for Bear. When you unlock the 3 out of 3, each time a shell is loaded into Death Knell, Olgath's accuracy is increased by 10 points up to 80, up to the end of battle. So this is a pretty significant buff. And the 9 out of 9, Death Knell will be loaded with 3 of each shell type at the start of battle. So this immediately allows him to start doing AoE damage, splitting his shells into multiple targets and dealing a massive amount of AoE damage with the other shell types. So let's have a look at how he does in battle. Now, because he doesn't have any damage reduction abilities or healing abilities, I would highly recommend putting him in the back row, as this will allow him to survive long enough and gain all the necessary buffs. So as we can see over here, there are 3 little bars that appear above this hero. Now, each one will represent the type of shell that is loaded into Death Knell. Now, as we can see, once all 3 have been loaded, an infernal shot will be dealt and massive amounts of AoE damage. Now, this specific shot or infernal shot is continuously used when Death Knell uses his ultimate skill. So let's have a look at his ultimate. There we go. There's the infernal shot, and it's dealing massive amounts of damage to the enemies. This in some cases can one-shot specific enemies if they have taken multiple hits from this specific ability. So as we can see, he leaps into the air similar to Flora, and he becomes immune to all damage and control effects for that specific duration when he uses his ultimate skill. There we go. So let's have a look at how he does at a much higher level deficit. Now this is a 200 level deficit. And as you can see from this specific battle formation, I've always placed him in the back row. Now, the longer the fight lasts, the more damage he can deal and the more buffs that he can acquire. That attack rating and that accuracy rating, which allows him to do massive amounts of damage with his infernal shots. Now, when you compare it to other damage dealers such as Lucretia, he falls behind. However, his main purpose is to essentially deal continuous damage or that AoE damage while he has 2 extremely beefy frontline tank heroes. So as we can see here from the first battle over here, we have 2 extremely powerful heroes that can immune damage or can give shields to themselves and their allies, and this allows Olgath and another hero to do massive amounts of damage. The same is true for this formation over here, where Olgath was able to deal massive amounts of damage because the enemy was controlled. So this hero is also similar to Kren, as we can see in this battle over here. However, unlike Kren, who can only deal damage to the enemies if they're standing in their own half, Olgath can do damage to any enemy as long as they are standing on your half or on the enemy half of the battle. Now, another thing that is extremely powerful is if you can group up enemies. Because his shots deal AoE damage, if you have a hero such as Brutus, Canuso, and Rook who can group enemies together, this will allow Olgath's hits to hit multiple targets with a single infernal shot. So let's have a look at how he does when he uses his ultimate skill. There's his infernal bombardment, and he's dealing massive amounts of damage to the enemies. Now, another drawback to him is he does not have a lot of control-based abilities. He only has his Cataclysmic Roar if he takes damage exceeding a certain percentage of health. So what is the minimum investment that I would recommend into this hero? So if you're building this hero and you would like to use him in your King's Tower or your hypogean tower, for your third, second team that you are currently building, he might prove a essential hero in order to be able to push those extremely high deficits or pushing multi-stage fights in the hypogean tower. So the minimum investment that I would recommend is getting his 20 out of 20 signature item. Now his 30 out of 30 is not that powerful. However, the additional stats will allow him to deal more damage as he is a damage dealer, and any bit of investment that you can put into this hero will make him more effective in battle. Now the next thing that I would recommend is getting his 30 engravings. This will allow him to essentially give him extra shots. So essentially each time an infinite shot hits, Death Knell will be loaded with one shelf each time that hasn't been loaded. So this gives him a larger variety of shots that he can use, either the shrapnel, scattering, or the piercing shots. Now his 60 engravings is not that strong, even though it gives him immunity, because the reason why I wouldn't recommend his 60 engravings is because of his ultimate. Now his ultimate essentially allows him to move up into the air, become immune to all damage, and allow him to easily cast his ultimate skill. Now his furniture is also extremely strong, and I would recommend getting him 9 out of 9 furniture. This will allow you to immediately start doing massive amounts of damage as soon as you walk into battle. So if you can, for example, group up the enemies immediately as you enter battle, he'll be able to use all 3 shots against the enemies, and this will do a massive amount of damage. So the teams that will work extremely well in is any teams that can group up enemies, such as Iran Firepool, or enemies that can essentially push the enemies into their half or group them up, such as Alna Grazul with Odin as the grouping up of enemies, and Olgath can proceed and deal massive amounts of damage to the enemies.